Hey guys, Thrasher here. It's a new month, and that means it's time for a new tier list. Let's talk about it right now. Okay, so before we jump into the list itself, let's get a couple things out of the way. We can finally move back to a single unit tier list. The meta is diverse enough now that pretty much you don't need to look at specific teams. You can look at a specific unit because there are many teams it can fit on, and chances are if it's a good unit, it's going to make any team that it's in viable as long as it has other characters in that team that are also high tier units. So that's great. We can talk about that. The second thing I want to note here is we just had some balance changes a couple weeks ago, and what you're going to notice here is half the characters that got balance changes, it was very favorable for them. They've moved up the list quite a bit, and then the other half, it didn't really move the needle at all. So we'll point that out as we get there, and let's jump into the list. Okay, first up is the D tier. These are units that are pretty much on deck for the next set of balance changes. One thing you'll notice here is Hercule is still down there in the D tier. It's not that his toolkit or his abilities aren't amazing. They are. The problem is his stats are still absolutely horrendous, and he has no way to properly link up and synergize with other units, so he just isn't going to get used. Even if you did buff his stats a pretty fair amount, you probably still wouldn't use him just because he has no quality way to synergize outside of his Z ability and the fact that he brings a card that no one else brings in the special move. With that being said, I don't think any other unit in this part of the list, the D tier, is out of the ordinary. I think most people would expect these. These are units that just don't get used. There's no reason to use these units. They're just not great right now, and they need those balance changes that I talked about. So let's move to the C tier. These are units that also need updates, but not as badly as the D tier. C tier units are pretty much not going to be used on any team other than the rare exception where you have them for bench unit purposes. So their Z ability might be okay, depending on what you're going for. So you have them there. They'll never see combat though. One thing to note here is we have a lot of units here that were good when they first came out, and they've, fallen from grace. They're not really usable right now. They need some updates. That Beerus down there has never been good. No one's ever said, oh, the Beerus is amazing, he's top tier. I'm hoping that when it gets to a point where he needs that balance change and they update him, that he's finally going to be good. I've never seen a Beerus in any Dragon Ball game I've ever played where he's an amazing top tier unit. There are a couple games where there's a Beerus is okay, but I really don't understand what it is about Bandai just absolutely hating on Beerus and never making him a good unit. So I hope when we get to that point, he actually can make a difference for some teams. Let's move on to the B tier. Okay, so as we stated earlier, the meta is very diverse now, and pretty much the way it works is you don't have to go after a specific tag or a specific team color. There are lots of different ways you can build a team now, and essentially what you want to do is have 3 characters that are as high up in the tier list as possible, that synergize and can deal with color issues. So one of the most common ways that people are setting up teams now is they will have 2 of the same color, and then they'll have the color counter. So purple, purple, red is a good example where you'll have your 2 purple units that are doing a lot of damage, but they can get hurt by a yellow unit, so you bring in a red unit. And the way you generally want to set that up is you want your 2 best purple units that are on this list, you grab your best red unit, and then you need to make sure that they can all synergize. So maybe your 2 purples are good to go, they synergize well. The red unit that you wanted to bring, your best red unit, doesn't synergize that well, so you bring your second best red unit that synergizes well. These B tier units are fillers. If you don't have a Z tier, an S tier, or an A tier, and you have to find something to fit into that last slot, you would grab one of these B tier units. Now, if you have something better than B tier, you would not use these units. So these are pretty rarely used. The one exception being the purple one-handed Spirit Bomb Goku is borderline. I would almost put him A tier. He still has reasonably good stats. He's got good damage potential. The issue is that there are so many quality purple units and quality purple Saiyan units at this point that he just falls way down the list because there are many other options that you would consider possibly better in most scenarios. So let's move on to the A tier. Okay, so the A tier are your quality fillers. Most of your team is going to be built out of obviously Z and S tier characters, but if you don't have those, the first place you're going to stop to grab a filler unit is the A tier. One thing you're going to notice here is we have our first unit from the newest banner, the Super Saiyan 3 Goku. The reason that he is in the A tier, he has a fantastic damage potential, but he's just pretty flimsy. And the problem is you have to be hyper aggressive with him because he falls off after 45 counts. So essentially when you're using that character, people know that you can do a fair amount of damage to him, and they know that you're going to have to be hyper aggressive, so they already know what they need to be doing and how they're going to have to deal with you as you start the match, which can put you at a fairly large disadvantage, which is generally the reason why back in the day I wasn't a huge fan of the Heart Virus Goku. He was a good character in his own rights at the time, but anytime that you are choreographing for your opponent what it is that you're going to do, it makes their life a lot easier, and that's why he's in the A tier. Let's move on to the S tier. So S tier units are quality units all around. They're just not the absolute showstoppers that you're going to see in the Z tier and possibly even the S plus tier. They all have a little thing here and there that's holding them back from being absolute crushing units. One thing you're going to notice about the S tier though is that it is heavily dominated by female warriors. So if you are running a female warrior team, you have a lot of quality options. Another thing to notice is most of these units have pretty good damage potential, with the exception I would say being the Janemba, but the Janemba himself has a ton of utility in the ability to deal with ki blasts and things of that nature. If he had better damage potential, he would probably be considerably higher because he does have lots of team members in the regen team, but that's not a huge issue because the regen team does have reasonably okay damage and they are super survivable, plus his green card gives a ton of utility. So let's move on to the S plus tier. Okay, so S plus tier units are cards that fall just short of being the very best cards in the game. These are units that generally have very high damage potential, but normally run into some type of a utility issue or maybe an issue with their viability as far as taking damage. Good example of this is the fact that Super Saiyan 3 Goku is in the S plus tier and not the Z tier. He does have a quality Z ability, especially once you get him to 5 stars. He can do a lot of damage, but he's super flimsy. Basically, anyone that does a fair amount of damage to Saiyans of any kind or a fair amount of damage to purple units can pretty much one combo him, and because of that he's a bit of a liability. That keeps him out of the Z tier. The other two units to really take note of here are the Ultimate Gohan, who is a fantastic unit all around. He's got the cover rescue similar to his father. He can stop you from taking damage from a Rising Rush. In fact, he can do it twice. The real issue there is there are just so many purple damage dealers right now. That means he's definitely going to be at a disadvantage running up against most of the teams that you'll see in the meta right now, as most people are running at least the Broly, and in a lot of cases they're running 2 purples. So that's just something that you have to deal with, and the major thing keeping him out of the top 8. The other thing to note here is Pan, who also got balance changes, has moved down from essentially being the very bottom of the barrel to almost being a Z tier unit. She is one of the top damage dealers on the female warrior team right now. For the first, I believe, 25 counts or so, she can put out some real pain for your opponents. She has a quality Z ability, and currently she's a must-have on pretty much every female warrior team if you have her, which you probably do because she's very easy to get. So let's move into the Z tier. Now these units are going to be ordered, whereas every tier below here, they were arbitrarily placed within a tier because all units in, say, the S tier or the S plus tier are close enough in their ability to help a team that there was no reason to order them. These final 8 units do make such a difference that there is a reason to order them. So let's move on to number 8. Number 8 is Turles. So he is one of the most recent balance changes, and he has gone from possibly top 3, top 5 worst characters in the game to one of the best characters in the game. He now has very good damage potential. He is immensely tanky with his 35% damage reduction, and his green card is insane. So before it was very RNG based, but now he's getting a guaranteed heal, guaranteed damage increase, and if you get lucky enough, you can chain these green cards. So you can chain heal and you can buff yourself through the roof. He is very hard to deal with at the beginning of a fight now. So let's move on to the next character. Final form Frieza. He wasn't the very first unit to get balance changes, but he was the first unit to get a high tier balance change, and he's been a top tier unit ever since. He absolutely destroys any Saiyan he runs into, and the reason that he's so high on this list is because there are so many Saiyans in the meta. He's a unit that can absolutely destroy most of your opponents, and he has one of the best green cards in the game. It can hit from any range, it gets off very quickly, and 2 of the primary teams that he generally sits in right now are very powerful, so he's still sitting in a great position. Let's move on to the next unit. Number 6 is Super Saiyan Bardock. He's been the glue on every Super Saiyan team since he came out. His ability to buff crit and general damage for the entire Super Saiyan team as he switches out and switches in is crucial to the viability of the team in general. He has his own consistent heal in his green card, which also gets rid of attribute downgrades. He's a very strong support unit, and while the Super Saiyan team would be viable without him, he takes them from being viable to being absolutely top tier. So let's move on to the next unit. Number 5 is Final Form Korra, Cooler, whatever you want to call him. He's essentially the mirror version of Bardock for the Lineage of Evil team, with some of his own quirks. So first off, he has blast armor when he's using his strike attack, which is huge. It's one of the best abilities in the game, if you ask me. It does give a lot of viability to the way that you can play the character, and some things that you can do that you wouldn't normally be able to do simply because you may be out of vanishing step at the time. If you know your opponent's going to use a ki blast, you can strike attack through it, and you're good to go. With that being said, he is essential on the Lineage of Evil team. Your Lineage of Evil team won't work without this character. He gives the huge damage buff that Bardock also gives to the Super Saiyan team. And while his green card does not heal him like Bardock's does, it can change blast cards into strike cards, which is very powerful, since strike cards can do pretty close to the same amount of damage or more damage in a lot of cases, and they cost less keys, so that's very powerful. Let's move on to the next unit. Number 4 is Green Vegeta, one half of the Unrising Rushable, Unkillable, Immortal team, whatever you want to call them. He can sponge one Rising Rush. When he goes down to 0 health, he goes back up and gains health again. So he cannot be killed until you've gotten him down to 0 health the first time. After that, he can then use an exceptionally strong heal that increases his damage, and when he vanishing steps, he can use his green card, which is essentially undodgeable. If you get next to the opponent, it increases your damage again, knocks the opponent back, and you can start a combo out of it. He's all around a fantastic unit, and when used with 1 to 2 other very tanky units, he can make some matches go extremely long. I've had many matches myself that have actually run out of timer counts simply because this unit, as well as 1 or 2 others, are so tanky and it takes so long to kill them that the match just didn't have time to end. Let's move on to number 3, Sparking Green Piccolo. He used to be a tier of his own. He was God tier, best character in the game when this game started. He eventually fell off because his stats weren't great. With the most recent balance changes, he got a good stat buff, and he also got a bunch of other buffs that took him from being a very good unit once his stats kicked in to being an amazing unit. His cover reduction is awesome. While he's not meant to be a damage dealer in general, because he is pretty much the tankiest character in the game right now, he does have reasonable damage potential with his 50% blast attack increase against Saiyans, because a large amount of characters in the game are Saiyans. So not only is he tanky, and he has one of the best heals in the game, he can also do good damage to the most common type of character in the meta. Beyond that, he sits in the regeneration tag, which already has tons of units that can heal a fair amount and are super tanky. So along with this guy, you can make some teams that are essentially unkillable. You may or may not win the match, but you definitely won't lose the match from lack of tankiness. Let's move on to number 2. Zuma Soo. He has reasonably good damage potential. He does 30% bonus damage to Saiyans and Hybrid Saiyans. He is super tanky. When he goes to 0 health, he goes back to 20% health, so you cannot Rising Rush him unless he's already been at 0. He has a 40% cover reduction when doing a cover change, and anytime he does take damage, he's going to heal 10% of whatever damage he takes at the end of the combo. So all around, he is super tanky, and then after all that, he's got his main ability, which can heal the team as a whole for 25%. A fantastic heal overall. He gives the team a ton of longevity outside of just his tankiness. So let's move on to number 1. Sparking Purple Broly. There's no surprise here, he's still the best character in the game. He's got blast armor, he can stop type disadvantage, he can move characters out of battle if he doesn't want to fight them, he does a ton of blast damage after he transforms. When he transforms, he can heal. There's so much to this character, it's absolutely insane. But one thing to keep in mind here is while he is still on top and has been for the last 2 months or so, the gap is closing very quickly, and it looks like by the time we get to next month, there will be multiple characters who are on par, possibly even better than him. But at the very least, we're going to be seeing characters at his level, so he's not going to be staying king for too much longer if we continue to see this growth of character power level. With that being said, that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys think I missed anything, throw it down below. If you think I should have switched some characters around, I'd love to hear about it. Let me hear your thoughts, and if you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.